Welcome to this week's video for the P News article. My sage, Reverend Sorge, is on vacation this week, and I had the pleasure of coming to you and sharing this message through video. My name is Ralph Lowe, and I am the Director of Justice Ministries, and I get the question sometimes, what does the Director of Justice Ministries do? And of course, I administer justice. All kidding aside, I do not administer justice. What I really do is I'm the catalyst for bridge builders, those individuals who seek ways to fight injustice, seek ways for equity, seek ways for inclusion, find ways to equip leaders that recognize these injustices in the world and train and educate them, build alliances and strategies within the presbytery, create support systems within the presbytery so that we can fight these injustices together to create a better kingdom of Jesus Christ. And as I was thinking about just the term justice and what that means for us, it occurred to me that if you were to give a scenario to separate individuals, strangers if you would, they would have a different opinion on whether this was injustice or unjust or just or anywhere in between. We have a wide range, for whatever reason these days, we have a wide range of our lens of what justice actually is supposed to look like, or injustice for that matter. One of our Reformed theologians, Niebuhr, he actually wrote several times about justice specifically, wrote and spoke about justice specifically. And this is actually a combination of a couple of things he said. What Niebuhr said was, any justice which is only justice soon degenerates into something less than justice. It must be saved by something which is more than justice, for without the grace of love, justice always degenerates into something less than justice. Love is the key. Love is the key. And that struck me when I was reading that, and I had heard it first, and then I went back and did a little bit of research and found these quotes from Niebuhr. And I happened to recognize that this week, which is, I believe, the 31st Sunday of the year, one of the lectionary scriptures for this week is Mark 12, 28 through 34, which is where Jesus is being questioned by the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and just to catch him, of course, and to confuse him. And a scribe comes to Jesus and says, Jesus, what is the first commandment? And Jesus says this: you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. First thing I'm going to say is the scribe asked for one, Jesus gave two, to affirm the importance of loving your neighbor in relationship to your love of God. Loving your neighbor as yourself. Now, I know I say that, and that is not an easy task for any of us. We've talked a lot about the division that exists in the world today. We've talked a lot about loving your neighbor. One of my colleagues and friends, Kathy Nelson, said, yeah, loving your neighbor depends on who your neighbor is. Listen, she's not wrong. We do have this mentality. We start to construct these boxes, these squares of provisions. We all do it. We construct these boxes. And then we ask the questions. Do you think what I think? Check. Do you believe what I believe? Check. Do you value what I value? Check. Okay, I love you. Now, the Mark passage for this weekend and for this Sunday is simply this: we should hold nothing above our love of God and the love of neighbor. The relationship with God as an example of the relationship with our neighbor. That means for all of us, anything that draws more devotion from us, from the believer, than God, it becomes an idol. And I'm not talking about a tiki doll. You remember on the Brady Bunch when Peter or Bobby or one of the sons found the tiki doll and on the Hawaiian vacation? Not that idol. I mean idols that we place above God. Idolatry, when we place things for value, for our happiness, above our relationship with God. God doesn't condemn us for seeking happiness. I want to be clear. But what we should not be doing is seeking it for sources other than God, for affirmation other than God, pleasures from those idols outside of our relationship with God. Now, of course, the question is, what idols, what What kind of things do we really do that we set up on that pedestal that it gets in our way with our relationship with God? Well, few of them are a pastor. Some pastors will say, "What? Our pastor doesn't say that. Our pastor has never taught us that. Our pastor doesn't believe that, so we don't say it or believe it." Idolizing. Put our churches above everything else. We'll say things like, "If you don't do church this way, do church this way, then you're not doing church." We'll also say things like, we'll put things like our country, our nation is set as an idol. Christian nationalism idolizes our ability to be free. It idolizes our freedom, so much so that we say no to say no. That's idolizing freedom. We idolize things like busyness for the expense of relationships. If you're not busy, if you're not working hard enough, something's wrong. Even if it's at the expense of relationships. We idolize wealth. God desires for us to live of good abundance, but not at the expense of others. We idolize our image. I am a 3 on the Enneagram, so this resonates with me. We want to try to look good instead of being or doing good for others. We idolize even our safety and security. Without getting too political, of course. Let's just say when we want to feel safe, sometimes our safety is at the expense of our brothers and sisters who are suffering. Sometimes we even idolize justice work, social justice work, because when the work becomes more important than loving the people that are involved, friends, that is when we place those idols, that idolization up above our relationship with God. Because again, the first commandment is to love God and love your neighbor. I get why we are prone for idolatry. I get why we are prone to have idols in our hearts, because we want to be autonomous. We do. We don't want to be accountable, because if we take the first commandment seriously, if we truly love God and our relationship with God, in that we have to admit that we are the creation of God, and then confess that we belong to God, acknowledge that we belong to God, and that God has authority over us. That means that not only God is the one for us to worship, but that we must answer to Christ for what we do, as Christ is the example for what we do and who we are to become. Idolatry, having idols in our heart, is tempting, I know, because at least in our minds, sometimes it's freeing. It's freeing from the hard work of loving your neighbor. But friends, if you believe or you say that you live by that first commandment, then that love requires an ethic of responsibility. We must identify our idols and then tear them out of ourselves. It is of very importance that we do that. Because the problem is, idols, by definitions, are sacred. So we hold on to them so hard. It's hard to dislodge them from our hearts. It can be painful to be idled down. The less idols you have, the more we're open to relationship with God. But we're also so used to those idols, it could be a scary place to be. But we are called to be there. I'm going to give you 2 things before I close of what we can do to allow ourselves to be idled down, to free ourselves from the idols that so many of us have that get in the way of our relationship with God. The first thing is, Reverend Sorge wrote last week in last week's P News article about the importance of Scripture. We all must filter everything through the lens of Scripture and conscience. Scripture and conscience. Scripture and conscience. Injustice is readily defined through the gospel. And to no one's big surprise, big surprise. How we respond is also in that gospel, in the scripture. And it's always through a loving spirit. The second thing I'd like to say is Genesis 1:26 says, "Then God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness." Now, I'm speaking from personal experience, so please understand this is my experience. As a man of color, I hear messages about my inferiority, negative stereotypes, prejudices. That only happens if you do not see me as created in the image of God. You do not see me as created in the image of God. Friends, people just want to be known, to be heard, to be valued. Daily, we see images of division where people tell you what you need to know, or they discredit you for what you do or what you say, or even placate to the masses for mass approval. That can only happen when we do not see each other as sacred and created in the image of God. We do all those things instead of insisting of upholding human dignity, seeing the God created in each and every person, God's image. Friends, our purpose, fulfillment, delight, and the very life itself flow from our relationship with God, to know and to be known by God. Through that relationship, we can fully understand and be in relationship with the rest of creation, with our neighbor. That cannot happen if we are holding on to idols. No justice work can be done without love, and you cannot love without seeing your neighbor for what they are, created in the image just like you and me. Now, as the bells toll, that is my time to end. I am thankful for your time today, for your time you spent here with me today. I hope that you value the word that you received today, and that I know it's hard to remove these idols from our hearts. And I know sometimes it can feel like those important things that we hold so dear in our lives are more important than anything else. But friends, I'm telling you, if they get in the way of your loving relationship with God, they are getting in the way of your loving relationship with your neighbor. And we are called to be better. We are called to be those Christians who truly value one another. And I promise you, if we can do that, we will all move to a higher truth, a truth that's in Jesus Christ, through Christ and the love that he provided for us as an example for one another. Thank you. And special thanks to my son, Cohen Lowe, who did all the special effects that you saw here today. Blessings.